Ocean of Storms by Brief and Dreamy. Chapter 2. Please, said the little ghost, rising to float along the underside of the canopy. Don't tell anyone, not anyone. He gets so cross. Harry wondered exactly what there was left to be frightened of once you were a ghost, but he didn't think it would be polite to ask. Okay, I won't tell. Why did you come to me, Colin? Colin gave him a quizzical look. Because you're Harry Potter. Right. That's what Harry had expected. He rubbed his eyes. You think I can do something to help? Well, said Colin, you did defeat... He grinned, wide and mischievous, then flew around in a loop as he said, Voldemort. Colin seemed to be a good-natured ghost, as far as ghosts went, so far at least. Harry smiled, but it faded as he remembered Colin as he'd been when alive. And, said Colin, you've crossed over. You've been to the other side and come back. We haven't. You know about that. Harry had told Ron and Hermione, of course, but not that many people knew the details of what happened in the forest. Ginny, Hagrid, Professor McGonagall. He thought of Dumbledore, his calm, steady presence at King's Cross, and the usual longing, combined with sharp, helpless pain, crept in. He dug his fingernails into his knees and forced it away. One of the Hogwarts ghosts was there when it happened. She told us about it. Myrtle? The Grey Lady? Okay. Harry shook his head. Who's this he you keep mentioning? Why are you scared of him? Is it just the two of you? Colin's eyes widened. He slapped his translucent hand over his mouth. Not allowed to say, he whispered through his fingers. You say you're stuck. Nearly Headless Nick told me he chose to stay behind. We didn't choose. It just happened. Colin, said Harry, does Dennis know? Colin floated down to the mattress. He shook his head. He doesn't think it would be a good idea. If people knew about us, they wouldn't be able to move on, he sniffled, looking miserable. Dennis is sad, said Colin. He's really sad. His face crumpled, and he burst into sobs that made his whole body shake. Harry cast a quick muffliato. He looked away until Colin stopped crying. How do you think I can help? I don't know. It would be a lot easier if I were allowed to tell Hermione. Yeah, she'd probably figure it out in a jiffy, but don't. He'll be cross enough if he finds out I spoke to you. There was a muffled rustling from across the room, then creaking springs and the sound of bare feet walking on stone. Colin gasped, Bye, Harry, then shot through Harry's chest and disappeared through the back of the bed. Harry shuddered and rubbed at his chest to get rid of the wet, icy sensation. His bed curtains parted, and Ron poked his head through. From his expression, Harry could tell that he'd assumed it had been Harry crying. Bollocks. All right? Asked Ron. Harry shrugged and scooted back to the headboard to make space. Ron climbed onto the bed and sat at the foot. He gave Harry an assessing look, then said, We may be relegated to the dungeons with the ferret and the rest of the snakes, but look at the bright side. There's a bright side? Harry pulled his knees to his chest and smiled. No classes, no essays, no boring textbooks, no history of magic, no Snape tossing out detentions. It's all learning on the go. If Hogwarts had been like this in the first place, I'd have had all double E's. You reckon? Seriously, mate. Jimenez is brilliant. I've learned more from her in the past weeks than I did all 6 years. He shuffled until he was lying down on his back, elbows akimbo, hands beneath his head. Even with his knees bent, he took up most of the bed. I still can't believe all that about Snape. All because your mum, Greasy Git, was a soppy fucker. An image of Snape when he was young flitted through Harry's mind. Snape, lank-haired and sour-looking as always, but twitchy and visibly paranoid in a way he hadn't been as an adult. Harry's mum walking at his side. I thought we were supposed to be best friends, Snape had said. Best friends. We are, said his mum. It was still so hard to hold this in his head at the same time as his own memories of the man. Snape so young, caring about a friend. His mum caring back, at least until they fell out. It made Harry want to like him a little bit, but he couldn't. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel about him anymore. Snape had loved Harry's mum, and Harry hadn't thought of Snape as someone who could love. And yet, Snape had sacrificed his life for it. So regardless of how horrible he'd been in life, and he'd been horrible, Harry couldn't help but feel some gratitude. He shook his head, then yawned. You want me to stay? Asked Ron. Nah, said Harry. I'd just wake up with your feet in my face again. What's wrong with my feet? Asked Ron, grinning. He stretched his leg out, trying to nudge Harry's face with his toes. They're perfectly good feet. Laughing, Harry shoved him away. They're hairy and smell like moldy cheese. They bloody do not. Ron sat up and tried to sniff his own foot. Well, maybe a little. Ron went back to his own bed. Harry snuggled down beneath his quilt, then cast a warming charm. He'd gotten good enough at them that it should last until morning. Colin Creevey, a ghost. Living, well, existing as a ghost seemed to be a miserable thing from what he'd observed. As nice as it was to see Colin smiling and speaking, Harry's last memory of him was of his tiny, lifeless body. He wouldn't wish that existence on anyone. And then there was this he Colin kept mentioning. Some domineering ghost telling Colin what he could and couldn't do. It all sounded very off. Still, nothing Harry could do about it just then. He let thoughts of Colin fade away and finally fell asleep. The mirror in the Slytherin bathroom had a tendency to lob insults at Gryffindors. Since it used Old English, Harry didn't usually know exactly how he was being insulted. It was clear from the mirror's tone, but the specifics were mysterious. Once he'd finished brushing his teeth, he'd pulled out his comb. Heard Malfoy gave you a hard time last night. He's a git, said Harry. Can't wait until the tower's fixed and we can get out of here. It'll take months. Seamus says they're still at the beginning stages. It's more than just, reparo. Harry forced the comb through his hair, wondering what Meyer had planned for the morning. Be nice to go in the common room and just relax again like we used to in Gryffindor. I can't set foot in without Malfoy having a go at me. As always, his hair looked exactly the same after he'd combed it as he had before. You've only got yourself to blame, mate. Can't believe you had a chance. You had chances to get Malfoy out of our lives forever, and you bollocksed it up. Harry laughed. What was I thinking? I must have been mental. He brushed his fingers over his jaw, wondering if he should have. Ginny had said he looked dashing with a bit of stubble. He put his comb and toothbrush into his wash bag and snapped it closed. The mirror spoke in its gravelly voice. Sorrow on thee, thou lumpish, unchin-snouted hugger-mugger. Hugger-mugger, said Ron. I always suspected you were a hugger-mugger, Harry. Damn, said Harry, and I thought I was being subtle about it. When he entered the dorm room again, Malfoy was standing in the middle, looking like he was about to be sick. You okay, He cut Harry off with a look of such venom that Harry pulled his wand out of his pocket. Malfoy must have heard them talking in the bathroom. You're just stupid enough to do it again, aren't you? Said Malfoy. You'd try and hex me again. No, said Harry. Malfoy stalked to his bed, which was piled with his possessions. He grabbed a book and threw it into his open trunk. Ron emerged and stood next to Harry. Are you leaving? He asked, sounding hopeful. Moving into the fifth-year dorm with Theo, said Malfoy. Before listening to the drivel you lot consider conversation gives me permanent brain damage. Nice! Ron turned to Harry, his hand raised for a high five. Harry hesitated, then slapped it. With a flick of his wand, Malfoy lifted everything on his bed and dumped it into his trunk in one go. There was a loud crunch, and Malfoy winced and muttered to himself. He slammed the lid shut, levitated it, and marched out of the dorm with his chin raised. The trunk bobbed along behind him like an oversized dog. Ron burst out laughing. Harry grinned and rubbed at his eyes, relieved. Without Malfoy in their dorm room, things were bound to get easier. The spell Meyer taught him made their footsteps completely silent as they crept through the forest. Stealth and tracking. Ron was right. This was the best way to learn. Meyer went first and Harry followed. It felt good to let someone else take the lead, to feel like he was in safe hands. Someone else's hands. Meyer had big hands, square fingers, nicely groomed nails, unlike Harry's, which were bitten to the nub. They wove between the trees. The sun broke through the branches in patches and streaks. The heated earth smelled damp, almost smoky. Harry's pulse beat fast, and the back of his neck prickled with perspiration. He could do this. He could be in the forest without succumbing to anxiety. He tried to breathe deep and slow, but the smell kept reviving the sick, cold feeling of believing he was about to die. You're uncomfortable, said Meyer. Would you like to take a break? He had a faint accent. His th sounded like s, his vowels strange. He hadn't gone to Hogwarts, Harry knew, but he wasn't sure where he was from originally. I'm okay. Embarrassed, Harry forced a smile. Meyer observed him for a moment. Harry willed himself not to fidget. I don't think you are okay, but if you want to keep going, we will keep going. It's something you'll do as an Auror, too. Missions don't wait for you to have your best day. You must learn to persevere, even when you're not feeling your strongest. Warmth spread through Harry's chest. Meyer was always honest, sometimes brutally so, and he never coddled Harry. We'll start with Hominem Revelio. It is simple but effective. Meyer demonstrated a series of detection spells, watched Harry as he tried them out, and corrected his wand movement and pronunciation when necessary. Half an hour later, they'd completed most of their round. This part of the forest was covered in sticky green moss. Their feet left indentations in it, and Meyer showed Harry how to charm his footprints to vanish as he walked. They passed a series of knee-high domes made of mud and sticks. Meyer knelt to examine them. Red cap hutches, he said. I've never seen so many. We must make sure no one goes wandering in the forest alone at night. They're dangerous. We learned about them in Defense Against the Dark Arts, said Harry. Meyer reminded him of Remus a little bit. They were both brilliant teachers. They're attracted to blood, aren't they? To battlegrounds. Meyer nodded. They're hiding now. They won't emerge unless they think we're lost or helpless. They moved on, checking the trees, the dirt, the stones. Harry longed to draw him into conversation, to learn more, anything about him. But it never felt like the right moment. They were always working, concentrating, and he didn't want to look unprofessional. He didn't even know Meyer's first name. He considered asking Meyer about Colin, but remembered how scared the ghost had been that Harry would give away his secret. We'll go deeper, said Meyer. We can't imagine anyone using the forest for shelter will be easy to find. He gave Harry a questioning look. Yes? You are ready? Harry nodded. Meyer climbed over a boulder and vanished behind it. After hesitating a moment, Harry followed, his jeans scraping against the sharp edges of the rock. The canopy of branches grew more tangled, letting through less light. A gust of wind made the leaves shiver. He blinked, letting his eye adjust. He peered into the thickening trees, wondering if he'd passed this way before. Meyer looked around, examining their surroundings. He nodded. I have an exercise. We'll test your new skills, he winked, then cast a disillusionment charm and vanished. The air shifted where he stood. He wasn't quite invisible. Give me 5 minutes head start, then track my movements, yes? Yes, said Harry. He felt a little better. A challenge. It would be distracting and possibly fun. He counted down the seconds on his watch, then cast the pulsatio charm Meyer had taught him. Nothing. He set off to look for Meyer, testing the air for changes in temperature. The tracking spells led him even deeper into the forest. Moss coated the trees. The air grew cold and smelt of earth and rotting leaves. He recast pulsatio and still heard nothing, and felt nothing. He was alone. Looking up, he saw only a few thin beams of light breaking through the leaves and branches. A misty chill clouded through the trees. His skin broke out in clammy perspiration, but he continued on, refusing to give in to panic. Pulsatio! A faint, barely perceptible tapping began inside his head. He went east and it grew fainter, north and it grew louder. He made sure that his footsteps were still silent and continued north. He checked the air and found that there was a slight increase in the temperature. He was on the right track. He rounded another boulder and entered a clearing. A heavy rustle told him that something was moving at the far end. Thinking with some disappointment that Meyer had made it too easy, he approached, but then stopped short, his breath caught in his lungs. Not Meyer. Instead, an elephant-sized acromantula scuttled towards him. Harry stumbled backwards and hit a boulder. Black, hairy legs thick as tree branches. It moved quickly and with intent. Trapped, he looked to the left, then the right, trying to find a path to escape, but came up empty. The spider was almost upon him, close enough that he could see his own frightened face reflected in its multiple shiny black eyes. He sucked in a breath and flattened himself against the rock. It scuttled closer, twigs cracking beneath its feet. Once it was only inches away, Harry could smell it. A filthy, meaty stink. Its pincers opened and closed, clicking and snapping. Spells sped through Harry's mind. Slowly he raised his wand, expecting the spider to strike. It didn't. Crouch had killed a spider with the killing curse, he remembered. Harry wouldn't use that spell. Incarcerus, Defendo, Stupefy. Acromantulas were sentient. They could speak. He didn't want to kill it unless he had to. He pointed his wand at the spider. "Back away!" It clicked at him, but didn't respond. Then it reached toward him with its front legs. Panicking, Harry shouted, "Defendo!" A deep gash opened in one of its legs, and the spider screeched, then contracted. Something black and oily pulsed out of the wound. It smelled putrid, sulfuric, and Harry gagged. He raised his wand again, but the spider retreated, crawling away through the clearing, then crashing between the trees. Panting, he took a moment to catch his breath, then cast Pulsatio once more. Meyer's heartbeat sounded loud and strong inside his head. Harry touched his temple, unsure he liked the sensation. "Harry!" Running footsteps, then a disturbance in the air, and Meyer reappeared looking agitated as the disillusionment charm melted away. "Godferdam, forgive me. I hadn't think to worry about these monsters. That one must have wandered quite far from the nest." He rested his hands on his knees, breathing hard. "You are unharmed?" "I'm fine." He looked at the ground, burning with humiliation. "Don't be ashamed. You did very well." "I was too slow." "You're being stubborn. It was a training exercise. You will learn in time. Don't expect to be perfect from the start." Harry kicked at the dirt. He'd wanted so badly to do well, to impress Meyer. He felt young and stupid. Meyer sighed. "I remember what it was like. You have a thirst to succeed. This is good. And you handled the acromantula like an expert." He smiled, making an effort to catch Harry's eye. "Maybe I should go into that instead of becoming an orer," said Harry. "Acromantula taming. I could join a circus." Meyer laughed. "Come, we'll go back now. It's enough for today." Ron and Hermione were waiting for him at the bottom of the steps leading up into the castle. He could hear their raised voices from yards away. "I'm not just saying it's dangerous, Ron." Hermione's hair bounced as she spoke. "I'm saying it's stupid. It would be a stupid thing to do." Ron stood with his arms crossed. "Oh, nice," he said. "So I'm stupid." Harry paused and shoved his hands in his pockets, looking away. Still smarting from his failure in the forest, he wasn't in the mood to listen to them argue. People trailed by. There was that blonde girl, Astoria, the Slytherin who'd stood up to Malfoy, climbing the steps with her sister and Nott. She glanced at Harry and he smiled. She looked surprised, but then smiled back. "You aren't stupid," said Hermione, "but if you do this, you will be acting in a stupid manner. Those are the same thing." "They are not. You're being intentionally dense." "Am I? Which is it then? Am I stupid or am I dense? Make sure you get it right." Harry coughed. "Oh," said Hermione. She put on a smile. "Harry, I didn't see you." "Here I am," said Harry. "Are we going to go? I need to get something from the dorm first." Her eyes narrowed. "You aren't thinking of going along with this ridiculous plan, are you?" Harry looked at Ron. "What plan?" "Ron's got it into his head to go to Glasgow to search for Dolohov, and I've told him," she glared at Ron, "that they have professional, experienced aurors for that." "Were you?" Harry asked Ron. "When?" "This weekend." "Right, I'm in," said Harry. Hermione covered her face with her hands. "No, no, no, I won't let you do this." "Hermione," said Ron, adopting the face he wore when he was trying to appear adult, "we can't just sit here roaming the grounds while that murderer is out there free. I need to find him. He needs to be caught." He made a fist and slammed it against his open palm. "And he needs to pay for what he did." He repeated the gesture. "For the people he killed. I want to be there when it happens. My brother is dead because of his lot. And Lupin. And Tonks. And—" "Please do not list everyone who died," said Hermione. She gave Ron a look that made him close his mouth. "I'm well aware." "Someone's got to bring Dolohov down," said Harry. "It might as well be us." "Merlin, Potter, you should see someone about that hero complex. It's likely to get you killed." Harry spun and saw Malfoy standing on the grass a yard away. "What am I saying?" Malfoy continued. "Carry on by all means. Do us all a favor." Harry shot Malfoy a dirty look, then turned away. "Oi," said Ron. "Stop having a go at Harry." "Oi," Malfoy imitated. "I'll do as I please." Ron walked towards him, pointing his finger. "Listen, you fucking ferret. You'd be dead if it weren't for him. A pile of ashes." "Ron." Harry took his arm. He didn't want another fight. He just wanted to go. Ron pulled free. What are you doing here anyway, Malfoy? As if your law aren't the reason we have to rebuild Hogwarts in the first place. He lunged at him, then laughed when Malfoy shrank away. Looking furious, Malfoy straightened up again. I've as much right as anyone to be here. Think it'll look good, don't you? Crawling back and trying to fix the damage you caused. That's why. You don't give a fuck about Hogwarts, about any of us. This is all about the... Ron put on a funny, posh voice. Malfoy name. Spots of color appeared in Malfoy's cheeks. His fingers twitched, but he didn't go for his wand. Harry figured it was because he was outnumbered and knew it would end badly for him. And you don't know the half of what he did. Ron's voice had gone high and raw. What he went through? He took a shuddering breath. You dare to have a go at him? You should be kissing his feet, you ungrateful piece of shit. Ungrateful, am I? Cheeks glowing, Malfoy turned to Harry. Is that the problem, Potter? Is that why I'm not showing enough gratitude? Not much of a hero if you expect people to grovel at your feet after you save them, are you? Harry threw up his hands. I never asked for any... Our savior. That's what they call you. Only you didn't save everyone, did you? The Great Hall was littered with bodies, and yet here you are, begging for gratitude. Harry went rigid. His pulse surged. Oh, fuck, whispered Hermione. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Harry knew Malfoy was thinking, bullseye, but that didn't hold him back. And who did you save? Harry asked in a low, shaky voice. Think you can have a go at me? What did you do? Merlin Potter? Malfoy continued backing away, his grin wavering. You'd think, said Harry, that you'd have just a little... He couldn't say it, couldn't bring it up, because he didn't want Malfoy to be grateful. He just wanted him to stop, to leave him alone. All those people, it had been Harry's battle. They didn't need to die. Why hadn't he gone sooner? Remus, Fred, Tonks, Colin, this vortex inside him tearing everything to pieces, and fucking Malfoy standing there like he had the right. What did you do? He shouted. He heard Hermione calling out to him, and he ignored her. Malfoy pulled his wand. Harry didn't give him a chance to use it. A split second later, he'd shoved Malfoy flat on the grass and was on top of him, pressing down his bony shoulder, making a fist to hit him. With a strangled sound of distress, Malfoy twisted, throwing Harry off balance. They grappled, Malfoy trying to grab Harry's wrist, Harry trying to keep him still. Malfoy arched, their bodies slammed together. Malfoy managed to grab a handful of Harry's hair. Harry whined and got his knee onto Malfoy's stomach. When he tried to use it to hold Malfoy in place, Malfoy yanked. A shudder ran through Harry's body. They both stiffened, went still. Malfoy stared at Harry with wild, darkened eyes. The side of his face coated in grass and dirt, lips trembling. Harry had the strangest impulse. Malfoy caught beneath him, both of them breathing hard. He thought of tearing open the front of Malfoy's shirt, scratching his fingers down his chest, and biting him. As he moved his knee, it slid between Malfoy's thigh and his groin. Malfoy's eyes widened and he jerked. They had another moment of staring at each other. Harry got to his feet. He turned back. Malfoy scuffled on the ground behind him. Hermione had her wand out. She shook her head at Harry. He gave her an angry shrug. Fighting won't solve anything, she said. You were happy enough to watch while he mauled me, said Malfoy. He shook his robes to get the dirt off, his eyes darting between them. You deserved it, said Hermione. Deserved a sight more than that, said Ron. Cold with adrenaline and a little nauseated, Harry brushed grass off his knees. His jeans had been stained. He glanced at Malfoy in time to see him quickly look away. He felt agitated in a way that made him uncomfortable, like he wanted to put his hands on Malfoy again. He needed to get out of there. Come on, he said to Ron and Hermione. Just forget it. I need to get Teddy's present from the dorm, and then we can go. Meyer said there were lots of redcaps, said Harry as they entered the Slytherin common room. Hermione nodded. They proliferate on battlegrounds near castles. They're attracted to locations where blood has been spilt. Hogwarts must be a redcap paradise, said Ron. Harry's skin erupted into goosebumps as the cold air seeped through his t-shirt. He headed for the dorm, passing Knot, who had a map of the grounds and castle spread over a table. Knot sat bent over, studying it, gnawing on a fingernail. Thin, pockmarked face and wiry brown hair. Every once in a while he'd tap the map with his wand and mutter. Buttoning her jumper, Hermione came over to take a look. "Did you do the charm work yourself?" she asked. Knot looked up as if he'd been in a trance and twitched when he spotted Hermione. "Granger?" Hermione gave him a direct look. Ron approached and stood by her side, glowering down at Knot. Knot swallowed. "Flitwick laid the groundwork. I'm filling in the details." He swept his wand over the map. Golden light bloomed in patches across its width. "It's brightest where the repairs are most urgent," said Hermione. "How wonderful!" She'd started shivering. "Harry, could you hurry, please? I don't know how you stand it down here. It's freezing." Knot frowned. Astoria sat by the fire, teasing her cat with a leather cord. She made a tisking sound. "You leave off," said Ron, pointing at her. He wrapped his arm around Hermione and rubbed her shoulders, trying to warm her up. Astoria's eyes widened, and her fingers fluttered over her lips. "No, you misunderstand me. It's the dungeon." She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "I am fully in favor of Muggle-born rights. They're every bit as magical as we are, and we should be welcoming them with open arms rather than falling prey to archaic notions of blood purity. But the dungeon, it's been here for so long, and I'm ashamed to say that Slytherin House has traditionally been rather backwards as far as Muggle-born students are concerned." Hermione's lips had taken on a bluish tinge. "Oh," she said. "Oh, of course. I should have realized. The Resonaudia charm." She looked around the room, eyeing the Slytherins with disgust. "Ron, I would like to leave. I'm going to wait outside." "Get a move on, mate," Ron said to Harry, glaring around the room. He walked with Hermione into the corridor outside. "We've got to do something about this," said Astoria. "It just won't do. Not anymore." Harry ran to the dorm and rummaged in his trunk until he found the rubber toy snitch he'd bought for Teddy. His stomach buzzed with the nerves. When he looked up, Colin floated a foot away. Harry stumbled backwards in surprise and fell on his bum. "Sorry," said Colin, covering his mouth and giggling. "You could try not sneaking up on me," said Harry. He got to his feet and closed his trunk. "He says you can tell Hermione, but only her. He says you'd better or we'll be trapped here forever as you've got the brains of a flobber worm." So, Harry was being insulted by ghosts now. Nice. "Who is this he you keep talking about? You can tell him I'm going to tell Ron as well." "He didn't say you could tell Ron." "Well, I'm going to. I don't keep secrets from him." "He'll be cross." Harry shrugged. Colin flew around in a circle for a bit, making an ooh sound. He came to rest on the floor, looking queasy. "It's not all bad being a ghost, you know, but you can still get dizzy." "I have to go, Colin. I'll talk to Hermione this evening." He shoved the snitch in his pocket and joined Ron and Hermione in the corridor. Flitwick had offered the use of his flue, so they began to climb the stairs, heading towards his office. They'd travel to the 3 broomsticks and then apparate. Harry steeled himself. Ron and Hermione were going to be with him. He'd be okay. Teddy and Andromeda lived in a small cottage overhung by a gnarled oak tree. A small stream trickled behind it. The front garden was laid with flower beds that looked as if they'd once been well tended. Andromeda smiled and held her back straight as she welcomed them in, but her eyes spoke of exhaustion. Teddy squirmed in her arms, and she clutched him like she'd float away if she let go. Harry tried to imagine what she was going through, her husband and her daughter, and it tore at him. She'd been the good one, the brave one, the sister who'd turned her back on hate, who'd given up her wealth and family for love. She didn't deserve to be punished like this. "So kind of you to visit," she said, looking between the 3 of them. "I trust the repairs are going well?" "Slow, but sure." Harry tried not to let his anger on her behalf show. "Wonderful." She ran her fingers through Teddy's hair, which was a rich shade of purple. "If you take him, I'll go and make us all some tea." Hesitantly, Harry nodded. She settled Teddy in his arms. So tiny. Harry was careful to support his head. Teddy waved his arms, wriggling, and Harry held him a bit tighter. He looked a lot like Remus, but his eyes were all Tonks. And his hair, obviously. "You'll be fine," said Andromeda. "They're hardier than you imagine." Andromeda disappeared into the kitchen of the little cottage. Ron and Hermione stood on either side of Harry, gazing at the baby. Ron put his finger against Teddy's palm and let him grip it. "You should talk to him, Harry," said Hermione. "He'll be starting to recognize people's voices by now." Teddy stared up at Harry's face as if fascinated by it, his godson. "What should I say?" "Anything you like," said Hermione. Not helpful. "Ask him what he thinks of the Cannon's chances this year," said Ron. Harry focused on Teddy and said, "You reckon the Cannons have the slightest hope in hell, or will the Falcons smash them and push them straight to the bottom of the league?" "That was unnecessary," said Ron. Teddy stretched, waved his arms, and then gave them a huge gummy smile. "Oh, look at that," said Hermione. Big brown eyes. Teddy would grow up being told he had his mother's eyes. It made Harry feel fiercely protective. They moved into the sitting room. Sunshine filtered through leaded glass windows. Birds sang in the trees outside. Harry carefully sat down on the comfortably worn sofa, keeping his eyes on Teddy in case he smiled again. Hermione sat next to him, and Ron stood beside her. "He'll be starting to recognize people soon," said Hermione. "How do you know all this?" asked Ron. "I read up on it last night." "Of course you did." He kissed the top of her head. Ron was always extra affectionate with Hermione after they fought. Usually, when he could, Harry would give them space until they were back to normal. Andromeda entered the room, 4 mugs of tea and a plate of biscuits floating smoothly behind her. She sat down in the chair across from the sofa. She had elegant posture, controlled but not stiff. Dark wavy hair, streaked with gray. Her resemblance to her elder sister still gave Harry a bit of a twinge. "He looks very comfortable with you, Harry," she said. "I've, got something for him." He tried to keep hold of Teddy while reaching into his pocket, but it didn't work. "I'll take him," said Hermione. Carefully, with some relief, Harry passed him over. "Be sure to hold his head." "I know." Ron sat down on the arm of the sofa and gazed at Hermione holding the baby. Harry looked away from his soppy expression and gave Teddy the snitch. Teddy's fingers clamped around it. "I'll get him his first broom," Harry said, "the best there is." "You will never feel alone," he thought, as Teddy gave him another smile. "Never. Not if I can help it." "She looks so tired," whispered Hermione, once they were back in Flitwick's office. She brushed ash off her blouse. "We should try to visit more often." Harry boiled with guilt. He sunk down into a chair and rested his head in his hands. Hermione and Ron looked at each other. "You've got to stop holding yourself personally responsible for the people who died in battle, Harry," said Hermione. "She's right," said Ron. "I'm not trying to do it." Hermione touched his shoulder. "Teddy is going to grow up in a world without Voldemort. He'll grow up in a world where he isn't hated for who his father was, where his father is considered a hero." "Still not the same as growing up with a mum and dad." Neither of his friends said anything. Harry rubbed his face, trying to clear his head. "Let's go and get dinner." By the time they'd descended 7 floors to the great hall, Harry felt calmer. It was less crowded in the evenings, as the Aurors and Builders went home once their workday was over. They sat down just as the food arrived, sausage and mash. He glanced at the other table, where Ginny was sitting with Dean. Dean whispered something, making her laugh. Her hair shook against her back. She looked happy. Harry was glad she was happy, but he missed her. Or at least, he missed the future he'd envisioned. He turned to say something to Ron, but he was gazing at Hermione with that sappy smile again. "What?" Hermione asked, smiling back, looking shy. "You've got gravy on your nose." "Have I?" "A bit. It's because you're scrumptious, like a sausage." "I don't think it's very flattering to be compared to a sausage, Ron." "Still makes me want to nibble on you." Harry didn't want to know where that conversation was going, so he tuned it out and concentrated on his food. Only now, Parvati and Lavender had started up too. They were full-on snogging, right there at the table. What the hell had the elves put in the gravy? Harry pushed his plate away and crossed his arms. McGonagall was walking across the great hall towards the exit. Harry turned to Ron and Hermione to tell them he'd see them later, but they were still wrapped up in each other. He slid off the bench and ran to catch up. "Professor!" "Potter." McGonagall had a knowing expression, as if she'd guessed what Harry was going to ask. She kept walking at a swift pace, and Harry kept up with her. I was wondering if I could possibly see the portrait again. She pursed her lips. I suppose there's no point in postponing the inevitable. Very well. Come with me. Harry hurried at her side all the way back up to the 7th floor. She moved surprisingly quickly for a woman her age. Her tartan robes rustled as she strode. When they reached her office, she turned to Harry and gave him a direct look. You must understand that the figure in the portrait is not Professor Snape. I cannot stress this enough. A portrait comprises only a small portion of the living person's personality and memories, and only what they chose to share with their portrait painter. I understand, said Harry. So don't expect very much from him. He, along with the other portraits in the head's office, is intended as a retainer of history, a source of advice, nothing more. Harry shifted on his feet, both eager and nervous. He nodded. She unlocked her office door. I'm assuming you'd prefer a private conversation? Yes, please. I shall be in my quarters. Will 20 minutes be enough time? Harry couldn't begin to imagine having a conversation with Snape that would last 20 minutes, much less longer than that. I'm sure that will be fine. McGonagall paused, a line between her brows. I'll be okay, Professor, said Harry. She patted him on the shoulder, then left. Harry opened and closed his fists. He squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, then entered the office. He wasn't entirely surprised to find Snape sleeping, or appearing to sleep. Harry wasn't fooled. Snape sat too still, his breath shallow, intentional. He took the time to prepare himself, to think about what he wanted to say, to ask, what he wanted to tell him. When he was ready, he said, I can tell you're faking, you know. You're awake. You're just ignoring me. As an afterthought, he added, Sir. Nothing changed. He waited, leaning back against the desk. Snape gave a theatrical little snore, and Harry snickered. He wondered if it would make a difference if he poked the canvas, possibly with a stick. His wand, maybe. He drew it and approached the canvas. Hesitantly, carefully, he lifted his wand, extended it, and poked Snape on the shin, which was as high as he could reach. Stop ignoring me, Snivelis. One of Snape's eyes popped open. Harry grinned in triumph. Insolent child, said Snape, giving him a filthy look. I suspected you'd return to torment me with your presence. You never could leave well enough alone. Try not to bore me to tears if possible. They wreak havoc on the paint. Only what they chose to share with their portrait painter, McGonagall had said. Harry wondered how that conversation had gone. He imagined Snape informing the painter of his contempt for Harry, what he thought of him. Well? Asked Snape. Harry licked his lips. I wanted to ask you about my mother, he said, then braced himself, expecting an aggressive rebuke. Your mother, said Snape. What on earth would I have to say to you about your mother? I saw your memories, said Harry. You gave them to me. It must have been after you were painted, but you gave them to me, so I'd know what I had to do. Snape stared down his hooked nose, his knuckles going white where they clutched the armrests of his chair. And you did it, he said. It would appear. Yeah, said Harry. I did it. They stared at each other. Snape's gaze was as sharp and invasive as Harry remembered. He clenched his teeth, determined not to squirm. Snape must be surprised. He'd probably expected him to fail. Harry stood straighter, refusing to look away, bristling with resentment. Mr. Potter, said Snape, do not presume to imagine that we are now intimates. I did only what was necessary. I followed Dumbledore's orders. I did what I could to keep you to your necessary path. You weren't expected to survive. He raised an eyebrow. I knew this, and I nevertheless urged you onwards. Harry considered this, the things Snape had done to help him along the way. You brought the sword, on Dumbledore's orders, and you left it at the bottom of an icy pool, Harry glared. Sir? Snape gave him a nasty smile. Conditions of need and valor, those were the instructions I was given. Harry snorted. Snape still hadn't provided what he wanted. He leant back against the desk. He wasn't sure what he did want. He only knew that his thoughts about Snape were unsettled, unfinished in a way that gnawed at him. I'd really like to know more about you and my mom, because that was the core of it. The one thing about him to which Harry could relate, the beginnings of a map for a man who was all murk and quagmire. I have nothing to say on this subject. I know, Harry said. I know that you loved her. Snape stared at him. He looked away, frowning. I cannot tell you anything about her. I'm trying to understand, said Harry. You kept so many secrets. If you'd only... Enough, said Snape. I am not beholden to you, Potter. I fulfilled any debts owed while I was alive. But was she the only reason? Harry persisted. You wouldn't have done any of it if not for her. You persist in questioning me when I have told you multiple times that I will not answer. I see you are no less bull-headed than before. But, sir, Snape scowled, and then with the flap of his cloak he strode out of frame and disappeared. Harry thought again about what McGonagall had said. Only what they choose to share. The portrait didn't know, he realized. The real Snape hadn't told it, at least not in detail. What had Dumbledore said? I shall never reveal the best of you. Snape would never have revealed his heart to anyone unless forced. Harry sagged against the desk, brooding. All those years of anger, of hatred. Was he meant to let it all go now that he knew the truth? Could he still hate Snape, knowing what he'd done, what he'd sacrificed? The office door opened, and Professor McGonagall entered. Ah, she said, was that perhaps less satisfying than you'd hoped? Harry shrugged. It's just a painting. Yes, Potter. She sighed and shook her head. I'm afraid Severus Snape will always remain a mystery, as much as many of us would like to seek to understand him. She patted him on the arm and moved behind her desk. Now, if you don't mind, I have some work to do. Yes, ma'am, said Harry. Thank you for letting me talk to him, to it, for letting me see the portrait again. Slowly, Harry descended the spiral steps, lost in his thoughts. When he reached the corridor, he paused to look out a window. It was a bright evening, warm and still. A trail of smoke curled from Hagrid's chimney. The forbidden forest spread out unto the distance. He'd grab one of the school brooms, he decided. Flying would clear his head. Feeling a bit more cheerful, he set off, but then stopped short. Malfoy stood a couple yards away, eyeballing him. Harry hadn't heard him approach. Merlin, he didn't have the energy. I don't want another fight. Don't start one, then, said Malfoy. Don't plan to, said Harry, already irritated. He hadn't been the one to cause trouble. He waited for Malfoy to walk on, but he didn't. He stood there, wearing an expression that made Harry want to go for his wand. Look, Harry said, trying to keep his voice level. There's no reason why we have to keep fighting. I don't want it. We should just be beyond it at this point. I'm not doing anything, Potter, said Malfoy. He cocked his head to the side ever so slightly, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Harry had the urge to shove him down, maybe punch him, to wipe that snotty look off his face. He remembered the thought he'd had earlier, ripping Malfoy's shirt open. His face prickled. He broke their gaze and strode past Malfoy, heading for the end of the corridor and the staircase. He had to go, to get out of there quickly, or something bad was going to happen. Besides, you're the one who jumped on me, said Malfoy. You've always been a bit wrong in the head, but it's gone beyond the pale. Someone should lock you up. You've served your purpose, after all. Tuck you away in St. Mungo's and spare the rest of us. Harry halted. He quivered, taut as a bow. Why don't you shut up? Slowly, he turned. He was still in control. He wasn't going to lose it. And I only jumped you because you can't seem to lay eyes on me without having a go. It's always been like that with you. Gives you a thrill, does it, trying to rile me up? Malfoy's smirk fell away. He stood still and tense, red patches spreading across his cheeks. The only thing that gives me a thrill is watching you walk away. The flush spread down to his jaw. I mean, when you're gone, absent, your absence is my thrill. I relish each moment I don't have to look at your idiotic face. Funny, because I never notice whether you're around or not, said Harry. His muscles tensed, his hold on himself unraveling. And if you don't like my face, then stop looking at it. He cringed at his words. He hated the way Malfoy dragged him back into childhood. I wish I could, but you're always there, lording it over the rest of us. Malfoy started walking towards Harry, waving his arms as he spoke. Great hero, our savior, he sneered. You brought him down with Expelliarmus. Pathetic. You're no hero. You were just lucky. Harry had an intense desire to back away, but refused to give in to it. Stop going on about it. You don't know anything. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. You're nothing but a pathetic, sniveling coward, and you wouldn't... Malfoy punched him. Harry reeled back in shock. He had not expected that. A hex or a curse, but Malfoy never used his fists. He touched his face where it stung. Malfoy gaped, apparently as surprised as Harry. He looked at his knuckles. Then he grinned, wide and mad, and swung at Harry again. Harry snapped out and grabbed his wrist before he made contact. They struggled, Malfoy trying to pull his arm free, Harry trying to stop him. They tripped over each other's feet, moving backwards. Malfoy knocked into him, bouncing Harry against the wall. It felt good. It felt like what he needed, an excuse to release his pent-up animal anger. Fuck you, Malfoy, he said, and shoved and scratched at him. It felt so good. The smell of Malfoy's sweat, the need to bruise him. Malfoy grabbed a hunk of Harry's hair and yanked. Harry made a sound far too much like a moan. Malfoy froze, lips parted, eyes wide. Harry willed his face not to color. Avid, focused. Malfoy tightened his grip on Harry's hair and tugged. Harry gasped, growing hot, then squeezed his face shut. He felt weightless. He wavered in Malfoy's grasp. Then he plunged back into the moment, the sting in his scalp, Malfoy's hard body pressing tight against him, his chest and shoulders heaving. Harry's knuckles shone white where they twisted the fabric of Malfoy's shirt. His thigh stung where Malfoy's knee jabbed into it. The heat between their tangled bodies surged like a living thing. Malfoy smiled, something cruel in his eyes, and dug his fingers deep into the flesh of Harry's arm. The soft pain drew out another dizzying wave of fever. Heat began to swirl, beating along with Harry's pulse, coalescing in his stomach, lower, growing solid, and Harry went white with panic. Let me go. He tried to twist, tried to shove Malfoy away, but Malfoy clung, holding him tighter, drinking in Harry's alarm. He slammed Harry back against the wall and pressed him there tight and helpless. Harry's knees went liquid, his face stung with shame. What if I don't? Said Malfoy, his voice high with excitement. He raised his knee between Harry's legs, making Harry swallow the sound that tried to swell from his throat. Malfoy's body quivered against Harry's, alive with tension. Merlin, he said, you've gone red as a licorice whip. Let me go, Malfoy, Harry struggled, which made Malfoy's knees press hard against him and sent sickening pleasure up his spine. He whimpered, torn between panic and the desire to thrust into the growing ache and increase it. He hit Malfoy's chest hard enough to wipe the triumph off his face. Harry went for his wand, whipped it out, and jabbed it hard against Malfoy's jaw. Malfoy cried out and let him go. Breathing hard, Harry swiveled, backing away, his wand still pointed at Malfoy's throat. I will... Gasping along with him, Malfoy rubbed the spot where Harry had poked him, still looking smug, looking pleased and hungry. Go on and run, Potter, he said. It'll keep for later. Adrenaline iced Harry's insides. I'll hex you 6 ways from Sunday later. Malfoy's eyes moved as if he were deciding something, building up courage. I'll hold you down harder next time. His lips quivered and his voice fell to a whisper. I'll tie you up. Fresh excitement froze Harry on the spot until he wrenched himself free of it. He shot a stinging hex at Malfoy's cheek, which made him yelp and draw his own wand. They faced each other, eyes locked, wands pointed. Harry couldn't think. You try anything like that, and I swear to God, I'll make you wish I'd left you to the fire. Malfoy went white, and Harry wished he hadn't said it. It was too much, horrible and vicious. No, you think about that a lot, don't you? Said Malfoy, blood dry of his bright energy. That it was a mistake. coming back for me. No, Harry lowered his wand. He wasn't going to admit anything to Malfoy. He crossed his arms. Just don't try anything or you'll regret it. Noted. Malfoy straightened up again and pocketed his wand. He smirked, but it seemed forced. I'll just wait for you to come to me. Whatever. Harry scowled, then turned his back on Malfoy. He stomped away, refusing to look back. Malfoy was dreaming if he thought Harry would ever come to him. What did that even mean? He shoved away the guesses that threatened to flood his imagination and fled.